It is my pleasure to welcome you to the crash course Quantitative Research Papers. In this part, we're dealing with the theory and state of research section. I would like to explain what is the purpose or the function of the theory section within the overall research paper, what is the content and the structure of this section, and how you could, and I would say should, conduct literature research for this section. Let's start with the purpose of the theory and state of research section. Every part of a research paper has a purpose and leads to something, to a goal. There's nothing in a research paper that's just there for fun or for whatever reason. Everything has a purpose and everything leads to a goal. And that is the same with the theory and state of research section. This section has two objectives. First, you would like to show what we already know, citing literature, so that we can see the research gap and then deduce the research questions. The research questions, they are our objectives, what we want to achieve with our empirical research. And these need to be based in theory. Again, the theory section shows this is what we know, and therewith is showing what we do not know and can conclude the research gap and the research questions. The second purpose of the theory section is to conceptualize, in other words, define all of the constructs that you will examine in your empirical research, that you will later operationalize in the methods section. You cannot come up with any questions for a questionnaire, for an experiment, whatever you're doing, out of nothing. Everything you will empirically examine and describe how you do this in the methods section needs to be conceptualized beforehand in the theory section. Let's come to the content. And you can have two perspectives or two sorts of contents in your theory and research section. One you could call the actual theory or definition section, where you conceptualize all your constructs. And then you also need to explain or report the state of research. What did other researchers found, normally in their empirical research, with regards to the constructs you are examining? Let's start with the theory part. If you've watched the first video of this crash course, you might remember that I've said a quality criteria of good research papers is that you work comprehensively or exhaustively. And that holds especially true for the theory section. You need to quote virtually all the theories that are out there, or all the definitions that are out there. So your construct that you're examining is defined in a certain way, in another way, in a third way. This is what you need to describe. And then you quote all of these theories that are existing, that you get from existing literature. And out of these, you deduce your own theory or definition. There, of course, you don't have a quote, but you conclusively deduce from the existing theories your own definition that you will apply in your work. That is the definition part, you can call it. But you have another perspective or another part, that is the state of research. Here you show why you've chosen your constructs for your empirical research and how your constructs might be related based on existing literature, existing theories. To this end, you look at the antecedents, consequences, and correlates of your constructs that you are examining. Antecedents you can translate what are the causes for my constructs. Consequences, to what do my constructs lead, and correlates what is associated with the constructs. In other words, you cannot always have a clear antecedents or root cause relationship. Sometimes it's just a correlation. There's some association, but we do not know what is the consequence and what is the antecedents. That is a correlate. To give you a simplified example, what are the antecedents of work satisfaction? A good team I'm working in, a good pay I'm getting, a purpose in my job. That might all lead to work satisfaction. What are the consequences of work satisfaction? That might be organizational commitment. And then you've correlates, to keep it really simple, perhaps a bit stupid, work satisfaction correlates with work dissatisfaction. And through these antecedents, consequences, and correlates, you can argue why you choose your constructs for examining and why you put your constructs into a relationship. Let me give you two examples. And with these examples, I would like to show you how to structure your theory section. So normally, you can dedicate to each construct you're examining one subsection. And if applicable, you should have another subsection for the research area you are examining. So an example I came up with, or I've showed you before in this crash course, is an article I could author with two co-authors, the relationship between organization commitment, commitment to supervisor, and servant leadership. So my co-authors and I had three theory sections. One was entitled Organizational Commitment, then Commitment to Supervisor, and then Servant Leadership. Each construct we were covering in our research, our empirical research, had one subsection in the theory part. Or another example, that was a study. I also had two co-authors. In this study, we examined how the people evaluated the anti-corona measures, social distancing, hygiene tips, and so forth. And we had a look at how people evaluate these anti-corona measures for their social spheres. And furthermore, we used the theory of planned behavior to make it a bit more complicated. No, to structure it, not to make it more complicated. The theory of planned behavior consists of the attitude, subjective norm, and perceived behavioral control. Against this backdrop, we need to introduce the COVID-19 pandemic. Explain what is this. Then the anti-corona measures. You could say the first two subsections are covering the research area, and with the anti-corona measures, the overall research objects. Then, with our constructs, we are examining the social spheres and the elements of the theory of planned behavior. We also had a subsection dedicated to the social spheres affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and the anti-corona measures. And furthermore, a subsection for the theory of planned behavior to structure the subjective evaluation of anti-corona measures. As I said earlier, I do not only want to give you an idea what is the content and the structure of the theory section, but also want to show you a way, which I believe is the best way, to search and use your literature, to do your literature research. First, what can you cite in those on such theory sections? So it has to be proper academic literature. Of course, these are textbooks or handbooks, but there's a very big but. Normally you can only use them for basic definitions. If you write a thesis, a paper that consists only of textbooks and handbooks, you probably have done something wrong. What you need with almost certainty is articles from research journals. Research and the findings, they're not published in books, normally not published in books, but in journals. So what you definitely need is articles from research journals, and there you will find the state of research. Normally you won't find the state of research anywhere else. So what can't you cite? There's a rule of thumb. Everything you can buy at a corner shop, no, don't touch it. So the same applies to popular science publications. Normally, if a consultancy, business consultancy, publishes something, they have their own interests. They want to sell their services. That is not academic literature. If the prime minister, a minister, or a president says something, don't cite this. These people are politicians. They are not researchers. They're not scientists. The same applies to dictionaries or the internet. Normally, do not use this for your academic theory part. But there might be a few exceptions. If you find empirical studies with a solid method and that is well explained, there might be an exception. Or you want to look at the general development within a society and industry, there might be industrial reports and so on. And to give you an example, I've just tried to elaborate on the structure of the theory and research sections using the article How People Evaluate Anti-Corona Measures for Their Social Spheres. The anti-corona measures, they were decided by the government. My co-authors and I, we conducted this study in Germany, so we needed to quote the Chancellor, back then the Chancellor, Angela Merkel, because she was announcing the anti-corona measures. That is an exception. And for the, let's call it actual research academic part, we have no such quotes in. We only used articles from research journals. How to go about your literature research. There are different approaches. You might go to the library of your university, but I suggest go a different route. And you should use, or I strongly recommend using Google Scholar. Google Scholar works like the regular Google. You type in some keywords and you get results. So you get in your actual keywords, your constructs you're examining, related terms, combinations thereof, and so forth. You will, as you can see on the right-hand side, you will get results like in the normal Google. And then you can click on these, and what you will find is at least the abstract, so the summary. And you go through the abstract, and you can see might be of relevance or is not of relevance. If it might be of relevance by reading the abstract, you need to get the actual article. Quite often you can find the article through Google Scholar and you have direct access, but not always. And then, and only then, you might go to your local library and download the article there. And this is, in my experience, the only way that literature research makes sense, and you will get everything. Virtually every publication you find through Google Scholar. So, Google Scholar, type in your keywords, the constructs, combinations of your constructs, and related terms. Look at the abstract as you find with the results. If you see might be of relevance, get the actual article through some other sources if you can't get it through Google Scholar directly. But you can also use additional functions of Google Scholar like cited by and related articles. If you have a fundamental article to one topic, it is a good idea to click on cited by, and then you will get all the articles that have cited your basic fundamental article. Furthermore, related articles will give you results for articles that are similar to the one you have found. This was the second section of a research paper, of a quantitative research paper, Theory and State of Research. The next part will be about the research questions, the third section, and if applicable, the hypothesized model. Until then, I wish you all the best, and it is bye bye for now.